So I just changed the setting in the terror deck. This is on 480p and I changed it to 2720. I realize that that's doubling like the amount of information it's sending. Is it alright if I do a few pans and you can just let me know if it looks, did Chris set the YouTube right? Are you gonna see anything? You might not see it till 7:30. I don't know.
Yeah, nobody seems to really get here too early.
In fact, they'd like to get here promptly, 5 minutes late sometimes. Fashion thing, that's what I was looking for.
Tron fun.
Probably.
How long have you been here for?
Just starting.
Are you getting any feed from the camera?
Sick.
And I'm
Up
getting
until
some
last
testing
year,
results.
maybe
Yeah, just let me know.
now I'm
Now you're
listening.
better, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
Trump's not the best, but
Mary, the special ed director's been here longer, and
Call the meeting to order at 6:35 p.m. First order of business, public comment. Hearing none. Second order of business, consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I need a little help on evidence of district goals in the superintendent's report. Do we discuss it after if we approve it? What do we do about
I think
that?
we have to pull it out,
There
don't
was
we?
no discussion on the consent agenda,
There's not, you have to
except
pull
to
it.
say to pull it out.
Yeah, you have to pull the item out.
Yes.
So what do I, so I vote against?
So you make an amendment to approve the consent agenda except for that which you want to pull out and discuss separately.
Looking at the timeline. Okay, then I would amend, there's already been a motion.
Yeah, so amend the motion.
Oh, amend the motion, I move to amend the motion to, remove the superintendent's report from the consent agenda. And then approve the rest.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I think we then have to vote on the underlying motion.
I think that's right.
No, that's right, we voted on the.
So
All those in favor of approving the consent agenda minus the items she read?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great.
Just as a procedural point, I think in the past, if you just said before there was a motion that you wanted to pull something out, then the motion could just be to
That'd be
approve
nice,
the
wouldn't it?
consent agenda minus something.
Much
That's what we
better
used to
idea.
do.
Okay, no, I think that's
So
right.
That would be,
okay.
yeah, I think that's okay, as
Whichever
long as
was
at the beginning of the meeting, I think that's fine.
That would have been so efficient.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can we discuss it for a moment?
Yes.
I would just love to hear, I breezed through this, I will admit, so I may have missed the context for this. The evidence of district goals being stated here, I don't understand the context for it. I did read it,
So remember, so when Mike Barry shared the
Yeah.
CIP,
yeah,
the district goal is, the district CIP is split into those 4 categories.
okay,
So in each superintendent's report, I'm asking principals, curriculum director, sped director to put the work that's happening within those 4 goals. As you'll see in the presentation, one of the board's responsibilities towards EQS and ESSA is to hold us accountable and monitor our progress towards those. So this is one place where I'm giving you evidence towards that. Does that answer your question?
yeah, so as part of your regular report, you will provide evidence that we're moving forward on those 4 goals.
Yes.
And this is just a standing portion of this report, okay.
Yes. It will change every report, but yes.
But it'll always be those 4 categories, and it'll always be on the report.
Yes.
And the other pieces of this report are just by program or whatever you call those, department or,
Yeah, it's more information by different departments that the board would probably find interesting to ensure that we're doing our due diligence in certain areas.
so if I see something like under literacy math, evidence of district goals, UES, RBS, math, and arts work, that's the curriculum alignment work, or the beginning of that process anyway. So are you taking what's above, because that's above this, so are you taking that and then sticking it in here? Not really, right? So that just happens to be in both sections?
It just happens to be in both sections, yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right, I got it, thank you so much.
Mhm.
The report's great.
Yeah, no, it's great, it's very helpful.
You like the pictures?
Yeah,
Those are cute.
very much.
Although the vertical reading can be a little challenging.
I know. I'll try to make the margins bigger. Maybe that will help that.
Or just go sideways.
Switch it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I like
No,
the,
that's true, I can do
Yeah.
that way.
I like those photos, this is,
Sure,
this
there's
is,
some 11th graders who probably help you get things on the page.
Yeah.
Adam, we're gonna put it.
so this is sort of, you do, when you do your work for the period, or for, it's actually, you do a weekly report to the district, to kind of district employees, is that who that's to?
Yep.
Okay. That doesn't, the intended audience is not beyond that, although I'm sure it's fine if it goes there, but it's really addressed to employees. Is that the idea?
Yes,
Okay.
and you all are CC'd on it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. I love that too. That's really wonderful.
And I don't know why you can't open it. It's only you.
Because you're sending it to my MPSVT or address, I think, instead of the one I actually use.
Okay.
But it's okay. And then and then this you write to us, which I see some commonalities, which is great. And I wanted to say that because I noticed these photos in the one to staff,
Yeah.
and I love that. And I even mentioned it to Jim that it's really nice to see you right there, literally on the floor with the kids. Like, that's a strong symbolic photo, and I think it's really, really great. So thank you.
You'll see one next week of me doing a wall sit with a kindergartner. PE class.
They're a lot more flexible.
They're a lot more flexible. So we need a motion to approve the superintendent's report.
So
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. So if it's okay, I think I'm gonna mix the agenda up just a bit. Jim Hutton is here as a representative of the Transportation Committee. He was originally scheduled at 7:30. He has his daughter is playing soccer. Her soccer game ends at 7, so he asked if he could move up a little earlier so he can get this over with and
Get her
not have her be impatient and hungry for any longer than she needs to be. So I'll just give a quick bit of context, and then I'll turn it over to Jim. But as you recall, back in the fall, we appointed a transportation committee to kind of set values and look at some of the issues around getting our kids to school safely and reliably, and also looking at some broader goals about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera. Jim was a citizen member appointed to the committee. Lisa and I were the board members on the committee. Well, the committee still exists. And we also had other citizen members, Ann Watson, former board member Ken Jones, Heather Voisin, and Kara Robichuk, and GMT visited us once to give us an overview. So go for it. Thanks for coming.
My pleasure. So just to get so the committee was tasked with coming up with this policy, and we went back a little and looked at what's happening historically. And I got involved actually when I found out that this is 4 years ago now. My daughter was going to be the first 5th grade class to be at the middle school, and at the time, and we figured back to the 80s at some point, K through 5 had been bused. Anybody that lived outside of a mile of town had an option of taking a bus to school. When we found out our kids were moving to the middle school, we also found out that there was no busing. And frankly, because I have no older children, I had no idea there was no busing past that point. I asked some other parents about it, they didn't know. I asked parents of older kids, and they said, oh, that's the way it's always been, So we started to ask the question of the administration and the school board of the whys. And the why was, that's the way it's always been, basically, or budget was the issue. So we've talked about it for a number of years, and the committee looked back at that, that history and tried to say, okay, if a student lives outside of a certain radius, and it's not practical to walk to school all year round in Vermont, or ride your bike all year round from 1.5 miles, 2 miles away from school, what can we do to provide that equitable transportation to reduce those single car trips into school, and to make sure that all the kids have a safe way to get to school. Because we know that the bus routes actually are providing a really great service to the kids that don't have a way to school safely. I mean, they're crossing River Street, 302, they're coming down Town Hill with no sidewalks. They're coming down Northfield Street, which is a problem. They're coming all the way out from past the State House, way up Terrace Street. And so kids coming from very long distances in the winter, and not always real safe areas. And over the years, we've also reduced the number of crossing guards at some of the major intersections in town. So as we were thinking about working on this policy, we came up with the idea that, or came up with the thoughts that we really want to promote safe pedestrian, bike, and public transportation options. We want to have the ability for kids to walk to school, kids to ride their bikes. My daughter does ride her bike when the weather allows and when her schedule allows. But because we do live a considerable distance and there are kids that live further from us, we realize that there's a need for other ways for the kids to get to school. We thought that there's an opportunity to work in coordination with the city, Green Mountain Transit. Right now, it's not a reliable option because of the timing with all the schools, so there's no way for the Green Mountain Transit buses to get the kids to school on time at the middle school or the high school. And we found that if you've spent any time, like I do every day, and Jim does, in front of the middle school or in front of, the high school is a little different with the big parking lot, but the middle school especially, it's a main thoroughfare into town from anybody that lives out in East Montpelier or out Town Hill. And it's also where every child gets dropped off or walking and crossing the road there, injecting all the additional car traffic into that area with now the bus coming out from Roxbury is a bit chaotic, to quote one of the Montpelier policemen. It is chaotic. So with the goal of trying to reduce the amount of trips into town, alleviate that congestion, provide open up additional parking for the bus and to the people who sometimes do have to bring their kids to school. The idea being that we don't have to have every single parent bringing their child into school. So I think the policy is with, or the policy recommendation is with the policy committee now. And with the idea that taking into account the kids that were at one point on those 3 buses, continue to have some way to get to school, especially with the opportunity now with the new school district and new superintendent.
Nice to
We
meet
haven't
you.
met. Hi. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, Lisa, do you wanna add anything?
I think you covered it really well, Jim. Yeah. We just felt like there was also, it's sort of an equity issue with making it challenging for some families to have to work around that schedule of getting their kid to school on time in addition to getting to work or whatever.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think what the committee tried to do and pass over to the policy committee and ultimately, the board, and I think the administration is, just the reiteration of some of the, the values we should have around transportation, which is, equity, safe and reliable trips to and from school for all students. I think, special consideration for, families where, especially on some of the outer edges, that's tough. Some single parent families or parents where, families where both parents have to go to work early. We do have challenging winters. It's not just cold to go a distance, but as snow piles up, roads that aren't frankly terribly safe in July become much less safe as the walking areas get narrower, et cetera. So those considerations, and then also greenhouse gas emissions. We want to be a district that I think is as carbon neutral as possible, and reducing individual car trips. So really, I think giving some thought to the values that should guide the transportation policy that I'm not sure the board thought deeply about without being prescriptive. And I know, Olivia, I don't know if you want to give some sense of what you've been thinking, but,
I did meet with Green Mountain Transit over the summer, and it's not, my understanding was it's not an all-out, not possible, like it's not out of the blue, because they're changing their routes. And I don't know enough to really speak adequately about it, but that was not out of the domain of possibilities. But Pam and I have been talking about it and think that we really have gotten some good feedback this year, and that we'd like to join any kind of group to try to problem solve this together with some parents. Students and I have some volunteers who I've spoken to already.
go.
I had kind of just an open question. I think the spirit, you know, all these values are huge, and one of them that I heard you allude to or talk about was the value of kids biking and walking. And I'm wondering if you think, or if maybe you haven't thought about this too much, but is the district doing everything it can to support those two modes of transportation? You know, obviously that's not enough, and there's some kids just out of the question, and at some point we pick some lines or pick some arbitrary spots and just say this is what we can afford. But it makes sense to me that we make an investment of some sort, whether it's just through effort or through infrastructure or whatever it is, in walking and biking. Somehow we really, you know, we know that's good for kids, not just physically but mentally. We know that it's cheap, it's good for the environment, you know, all these things. And so could we create a plan that enhances our busing plan with our walking and biking plan? And could we be making all of the investments we need to? I know, for instance, in the middle school, it's really hard to find a bike rack sometimes if you're biking. It's like, oh man, there's not enough bike racks. Tie it up to a tree, tie it up somewhere else, find somewhere tied to another bike. And so I don't know whether there's a lot more we can do. Maybe we could be working with and this is not a substitute. It's just an enhancement. Could we be working with the city on saying, you know, this particular sidewalk is really a problem, or the fact that there is no sidewalk here is really a problem for encouraging children to walk or bike. So I just wonder whether we should do that too, as a serious planning around the school. Is, can our kids get there by bike? Can they get there by walking? And what are the problems? And ask the kids, why, you know, where's the worst spots on your route for walking or biking? Where does it feel dangerous? Where do you have to cross something that, you know, because I know the city's up for making things more pedestrian friendly, making things more bike friendly, and I don't think that's a big ask if we go back to them. So I'm wondering whether you guys talked much about that.
What we did talk about is, you know, the crossing guards, where I know
Yes.
there's been a reduction in crossing guards in some areas, and that may be because there just weren't a lot of kids walking anymore in some of those spots. At the bottom of at the Granite Street Bridge crossing 302 Berlin Street, for years, I mean, everybody knew him as the guy that waved. He waved at every single car that went by. He was there for many years, but is no longer there. Is there still a crossing guard by the library? Library. So there's some places where there aren't crossing guards. I mean, obviously the crossing guard at the middle school is invaluable, he is amazing, by the way. That guy should get a triple raise. Unbelievable what a good job he does at controlling that flow of traffic. I mean, he's got a ton of responsibilities. There was a substitute there the other day doing his job, and it was not nearly as well handled. So he does a great job, but you know, I don't know that there's crossing guards in all places, and we did discuss that a little bit. But any opportunity to provide that safer travel would be great. You know, the city is working obviously on the bike path plan. We don't have a good network of, we don't have a network of bike paths, right? We have one bike path that goes one direction essentially. We do have a lot of good sidewalks. You know, but they don't all connect outside of the core downtown area.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the thought from the committee was, it'd be great to, encourage the district to think creatively about better transportation generally, not just adding more buses, but, the things you talked about, because, frankly, a lot of the car trips in middle school and Union are not people who necessarily live places where you can't walk or bike. And
Sure.
if you could make it easier to walk or bike, you'd reduce some of those trips. you know, one idea that someone in the committee floated was, why don't we have some sort of, you know, fee or reward for people who carpool to the high school? So we're reducing the number of single car trips to the high school, or, you know, some sort of, you know, reward-based system for people who bike or walk to the high school. You know, because high schoolers are at an age where they can probably bike from further distances. So I think thinking creatively about, while acknowledging the fact that it's difficult for some people to walk or bike, making it easier for all people to walk and bike who want to, especially, you know, in the radius where walking and biking is pretty easy. And then, you know, I think you can do some things to extend those areas out. So, I mean, I'd love to see as many people walking and biking as often as possible, but I also don't want to, I think it's difficult to say that's the answer for everyone all
it's
the time.
not. Yeah. I
And
mean,
I
we
think
talk
we-
about the middle school being a walking school, which is kind of a joke, really, but that is sort of what we've always said, because we don't want to put the infrastructure for other things. And we don't have parking, we don't have bus drop-off really even. We don't even have car drop-off really. I mean, it's pretty sketchy. So it's really a walking school or nothing, and yet we've crammed in tons of vehicle trips into that block. So, you know, if we can't be a walking school, can we, you know, I mean, I don't know, I'm not saying I don't support more busing. What I'm saying is, you know, maybe we need a satellite drop-off spot somewhere where kids arrive at that spot that's can handle the traffic, and then they can walk over from a block away or 2 blocks away or 3 blocks away rather than from 2 miles away. And so it seems to me that we do want to be creative and not just add buses at this point. And I think we may still have to add buses, but it's that kind of thinking that I'd like to encourage.
We did talk about the combination of the GMT and also the existing school buses. You know, the kids certainly could, middle schoolers could obviously walk from the elementary to the middle school. The problem is, you know, when you start to talk about that, you talk about the timing of when school starts.
Sure.
So we have the opportunity, a lot of those buses aren't full, and I think from personal experience, and Jim may have this personal experience from his end of town, of driving behind the elementary school bus to school. I mean, I drive behind it and stop. when it stops, the bus goes to the elementary school and I go to the middle school. You know, that doesn't make sense anywhere at all, you know, for anybody. You know, maybe aligning, you know, we didn't have as a committee you know, I don't think the scope to say we need to realign the school starts, but, you know, we have existing buses, you know, utilizing them better to make sure that, can an 8th grader ride a bus with a kindergarten? I know that's a.
You do in lots of places.
Lots of places, right? You know, I don't know. I heard a lot of pushback on that you can't do that. But there's obviously a lot of creative ways to get kids to school if either the times of the buses work or the times of the GMT buses work. And then when the weather's good. I mean, we did have to rein in the idea that everybody can ride their bike. Like I said, my daughter does a lot, and some of those kids, but I mean, there are 6 months out of the year where the snow is piled high and the roads are not safe and clean for the kids to ride to school. So, I mean, I think we were looking at that, okay, what about for everybody? And the kids who just don't ride bikes. My next door neighbor doesn't ride her bike to school, even when my daughter asks her to. She's done it twice. She's a 13-year-old girl that won't ride her bike to school. It just happens. You know, there are some of those kids that won't. She would walk, but it's a long walk. You know, it's a 45-minute, hour walk.
Great.
What is the rough cost estimate for basically duplicating the elementary school busing at the middle school?
Bus is
What
about
is it?
$60,000.
And we run 3 for the elementary school?
Yep.
Just wanted a framework to work.
It's in the budget prediction.
How are we doing on occupancy on those buses or capacity on those buses? Do we know? Are we mostly full on them?
I don't know, we don't have a transportation coordinator. That's one of the challenges we're having now with adding buses for Roxbury.
Sure.
You know, they're not our buses, it's contracted, so I don't know if something.
Yeah, and I'm not not sure, that's been asked before, and I haven't heard an answer
Yeah.
to it, if there's anecdotal information.
Just whether you have to add 3 more, or you can add 2 more, or what you would do, or 1 more.
Well, and I think,
met with Stacy, the bus company, the person who runs it, and we discussed it a little bit. And while they're not at occupancy, they can't take the entire middle school section of kids into the union buses. And she was talking about start and end times and all that kind of thing, which is a bigger can of worms. And it would eliminate other things that we can do if we did that. So I would think that we take this year to study it with school people and, you know, Pam, who knows the kids and families best in that area and the needs of the middle school.
yeah, and I also am not sure that the busing needs in the middle school are gonna be the same as the elementary school, just, you know, for one, because, you know, the kids are older, you're gonna have a lot more kids who are able to, you know, walk or bike.
Who won't want to be on the bus.
Or who won't wanna be
Right.
on the bus, and also, you know, that's when more kids have after-school activities and other things, so I'm not sure that, even though the sizes are similar, I'm not sure the needs are the same.
Kind of leads to sort of what the policy committee was trying to figure out where to go next with this without, or, you know, really first and foremost respecting the work that's already been done and being very careful. You know, it's when we talk about studying it for a year, it can send the message that thank you very much, and we're gonna study for a while. And I think that nobody wants to send that message. What we were trying to do was think about maybe possible next steps. And, you know, we didn't take a formal action on this, but we had an idea that maybe the way to approach this would be to, you know, create or maintain a transportation, well, first of all, to adopt an interim transportation policy just to get us through this year and this coming year probably, and to have some sort of a, just get something, probably what our status quo in policy, but to note in that policy that that it is a interim policy, or that it is a, you know, that we're gonna continue to work right in that policy, so we don't lose track of that. And then the other piece of it was to basically have the board charge the administration to do what you're suggesting, Libby. And in fact, to create some sort of like an ad hoc working group or ad hoc committee that would study it and would work on it, including looking at the money issues, and the infrastructure issues, and potentially the school schedule issues, whatever, you know, impacts there would be on various options, and to choose, you know, an option that makes the most sense based on the values that we've all articulated, but also the realities of all those things. And that, you know, hopefully that committee would be made up of community members and board members and some sort of an advisory role to you, so that it would be informed by those ongoing kind of balanced values discussions. And then coming back with a vision, basically, and something that we would think of it as kind of like the next generation of busing vision, like the next decade kind of vision, versus what we've had was the last decade. And that it's time with this new district coming together that we do overthrow this thing, or overhaul this, and really think about from scratch. And budget has to be on the table for that. We can't just say, well, it's expensive and it needs to be budget neutral. I think that was a piece of it, is with budget recommendations, whether it's a high enough value to be proposing something new in the budget or not. So we don't have that formed into a policy, but that concept, wanted to kind of test that with the board and see if folks thought that was an appropriate way, and it sounds like Libby's already on it.
Yeah, Jim and I were just talking about this one.
Cool.
And did you have an idea of, like, would that mean that sometime in the spring the committee would present the vision and then perhaps start implementation for next school year?
Libby, I'd let you.
Not if it has budgetary implications, we'd have to move a little faster.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't have it worked out. I mean, I think really Libby, I'd really defer to you in terms of trying to identify kind of a good workable process that kind of, you know, that's it really, and as fast as you think could be done. But if we're really talking about a big vision here that's gonna incorporate these values for the next, you know, decade or whatever, then we should do it right also. But I mean, I think this respects the fact that we think to some extent this is an administrative role.
Definitely is.
It's really one of those things that's gonna require a lot of nuts and bolts to get it to work, and a budget proposal rather than the community or the board saying, you know, here's where we should draw the lines on where the buses are. And I'd be interested in hearing your reaction to that idea.
Yeah, I'm comfortable, I'm certainly comfortable with the idea. I understand it's not gonna happen for this school year since that ship has obviously sailed. You know, it's been something I've been talking to within the community and the school board about for 4 years now. So I would just ask you please to be very respectful of the fact that, you know, as you push this off, it just means every single day longer that we do this, that, you know, I've said this before, I take, if I have to drive my daughter every day to school and back, I take 360, 720 trips a year. It's 180 school days, you know, here and back. So I take, you know, a round trip, 360 trips a year. And I have the flexibility in my work schedule. So for me, I can do that. I know there are a lot of people that it's a bit of a burden for, and we're also, you know, that's a lot of cars we're putting in downtown core of a town that wants to be net zero. You know, so every time we push this out another year, say it's too expensive and not find innovative ways to solve the problem, I think that's a disservice to the community as a whole. So, you know, any way we can, and even if there's interim solutions, I know maybe we don't bite off the whole thing at once and just completely solve this problem, but, you know, if the kids can start riding the buses, if, you know, I pose a question, was like, kids have homeroom for the first 15 or 20 minutes of the school day in the middle school. What happens if they're late by 10 minutes every day? You know, I don't know. When I was in school, homeroom didn't matter. It was where kids just showed up because they had to show up someplace. I don't know if TA matters educationally.
Don't believe I would make that same statement.
Okay, and I'd like to think that we weren't just sitting and the kids weren't just
waiting around for buses,
wasting time. But you know,
I hear what you're saying,
you know,
though. I mean, I have a fifth grader who's now going to middle school, and there is no way with my present employment, and I'm not just saying this because my bosses are sitting right next to me, that I could get my child to school without the bus. And there's just no way I could do it with my husband and his work schedule as well. So I understand that concern very, very well. So we'll get on it.
So tell us, Libby, what you envision in terms of timeline. I can't, my brain and calendars and budgets don't work sometimes.
We are very much looking towards this presentation as a kickoff. Pam and I have been talking about it. We have an email with Jim that said we have a time. Did we make a time? We made a time.
October 1st.
Yeah, we made a time for the three of us
calendar.
to sit, Pam, Jim, and I, to sit down and really get things going. I have one parent who said, "Tell me where to be, and I will be there."
Yeah.
To me to talk about this, and I know Pam has a couple other suggestions as well. So we'll get this kicked off, and you'll see in the pressures from the budget discussion piece, busing is on there at the high end, because it's Grant who's writing that document, but it is on
Sure.
there that we're considering. So
Okay, so there's a thought that we could do something with budgetary implications in this budget round, if we choose to do so.
we might not have the full answer or the
Sure.
full pledge, but we could certainly put something together for the community and take it to the voters and see if
Sure.
they approve that.
Okay.
Anything else, Jim? Thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you for
Yeah,
your
no,
time
thank
and
you.
for the whole committee.
Appreciate it. It was
Yeah.
fun. It was an interesting project to work on for sure. And I'd like to be involved too if you know,
I'll
going further.
keep that in mind.
Great.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Jim.
We can do the board presentation, yeah? Or do you wanna move on to something else?
Well, we're under board governance. Want to switch back to the learning focus?
Totally up to you.
I don't care either way. Let's hear from the new board members because
Yeah,
they're here.
Yeah.
Although it might be good for both of you to stay through the meeting until, just to get a sense, because you may be serving soon. But why don't we just knock out the board governance piece and want to give both of you a chance to introduce yourselves. Are you Tanya?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. That's what I thought. But we have, as you know, Peter Sterling, resigned, and under the process, the board appoints someone, and then the city council has to ratify that. And they're planning to do that to 26, but we got two applicants who very thankfully have thrown their hat into the ring, Andrew Stein and Tanya Tanya McGrath and Andrew Stein. Both wrote letters to the board expressing interest, so we're going to make a choice later in executive session, but we want to carve out 2 to 3 minutes for you to introduce yourself, kind of reiterate what you said in your letter, but introduce yourself, and then we'll also give a minute or 2 for the board to ask any questions if they want to. So Andrew, why don't you go first since you're in front, and introduce yourself for the camera as well.
Sure. Andrew Stein, resident of Montpelier, of course. So I've spoken with each of you via the phone or in person, and thank you so much for your time and sharing your insights. I don't have much to add from our discussions previously or from my letter of interest. I really care about the well-being of Montpelier's students, teachers, administrators who foster the learning environment, our schools. I have a lot of experience in government and communications that I think would lend a valuable perspective to this board, and I think would help this board during this transition process as you begin as a new school district with new leadership. And I'm a very hard worker, an eager learner, and a caring community member. And it would be an honor to serve this city in this capacity. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them.
Question?
Yes. I'm going to ask just a general question.
Sure.
So this is for a temporary appointment. If it wasn't for a temporary appointment, would you see yourself running in the spring for a full term anyway?
Yeah, so full disclosure, when Peter Sterling was thinking about leaving his position, he was talking to different people about filling this post, and I was one of the folks who he approached about the position, and we talked for several weeks about it, and he didn't want to leave until he was certain that somebody was applying who would be interested not only in filling the temporary vacancy, but had an interest in carrying on. And so that would be my aim. Of course, it's up to the voters of Montpelier, and that would be out of my control, but I would, in this short time, try to prove my value as much as possible to them.
Sure.
Any other questions for Andrew? Great, well, thank you. And again, feel free to stick around because it will be educational.
All right, I'll thank you. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Tanya?
Yeah.
And again, please introduce yourself for the name-wise for the good ones.
Hi, I'm Tanya McGrath. I have 2 daughters, one at the Main Street Middle School and one at Union. And I don't have a lot of experience in governmental stuff, but I do have a daughter who has been on a 504, and I feel like that's kind of a important perspective to bring to the board. And yeah, didn't really come with a prepared statement, but I run a little cleaning business, and I feel like a maintenance-oriented perspective I could bring, that sort of thing. Sorry, I don't have more to say. I would definitely be learning on the fly, but I think I'm a quick learner and I'm interested, so I figured I'd try.
Excellent.
Thank you.
I guess I asked you the same question. Would you consider running for the full board again in March instead of just a temporary appointment?
I think so, but one of the reasons I was so interested in the temporary appointment was to sort of see what it entails and if that's something I want to do. I am interested in getting involved in the school governance, but I'm not exactly sure the extent of what it entails, so tentatively, yes.
Sure.
Steve?
I want to pull something, you wrote a short letter of interest, which was very helpful, and one of the things you brought out, which you didn't mention just now, but I want to give you a chance to talk about it if you choose, is mentioning your progressive education and blue collar background. And if you don't mind, just talking a little bit about what that means in terms of bringing that to the school board.
Attending Goddard is, a very progressive institution, and I feel like the traditional education over the years has been moving more towards that, with a lot of things like mindfulness in the classroom, more play-based learning, that sort of thing. And I have put a lot of personal research into just what's good for kids' development in that field. I feel like it's a really positive move for traditional education to be moving more towards progressive sort of things. I threw in the blue collar thing mostly just because I feel like that's a perspective that's important, since so many of the kids who go to school come from blue collar families, and that's a perspective that sometimes gets overlooked in governance. I guess.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Great, thanks, Tanya.
Thank you.
And again, please feel free to stick around. We're not going until the end, but we're going to be talking about the budget.
They both know the process we go through?
Huh?
Do they both kind of have a sense of the process we go through?
I think I explained it earlier at the beginning. We'll make a choice, but just to reiterate, we'll make a choice in executive session. We will pass that name along to the city council. The statute's a little unclear as to what the city council needs to do. We need to consult with them, but having them vote on it is as much consultation as they can possibly have. So we've asked Bill Fraser to tee up a vote on the consent agenda on the 26th. We're assuming the city council will pass it, but assuming they do, whoever we choose that will officially be the appointment, and then on our next meeting, which is October 3rd, you'll be a board member. You'll have to be sworn in, and you'll get to join us up here.
And Jim, just to be clear, the board can discuss the appointment in executive session,
Yes.
but the action has to be taken. We'll have to come
Yes,
back to
the action needs to be taken here. So, but we'll confer and then come back and vote. Thank you.
ESSA?
Yes, Essa. Thank you for being proficient.
You're my boss, I'll do whatever you want. So this is gonna be relatively short and sweet, as always. I live and breathe this stuff, so if I start using jargon and acronyms especially,
Do you want to dim lights for?
please call me out. This is a presentation that I actually created last year, and just updated it for this year. So ESSA is the new education law. It's the new No Child Left Behind, now called ESSA, Every Student Succeed Act. A little funny tidbit is when Congress originally wanted to call this law or put this law in action, it was ASSA, just something to put out there every time you see that term. And EQS, which is the Educational Quality Standards. It's kind of the laws that Vermont has adopted. You do have a role in this, so that's what it is. When ESSA first came out, it was definitely advertised to give states more control and leniency. That is yet to be seen. I don't know how much it actually has achieved that fact. And then the EQS, they were adopted in April 2005. There are rules. We're held accountable to them by a process that is still being pilot. We wouldn't call it a pilot right now, but it's still being practiced, and it's called the internal field review. we're in a wait and see mode for the internal field review because the person who has been in charge of that process was just, the Secretary Deputy Amy Fowler, which if you've been following Ed News, was just asked to leave the AOE with the new secretary. So she was literally the brainchild behind that, so it will be interesting to see what happens with this process. So here's your board. We're going to go through some of these things. It's going to be relatively quick. Board's roles in EQS and ESSA you have a role in adoption of certain policies, most of which we have, if not all of which. The approval of the continuous improvement plans and monitoring the effectiveness, which we were talking about earlier with the superintendent's report. That's one way I'm giving you evidence of that. Budgeting resources so we can accomplish our goals. Just an awareness that these are our policies, so when community members ask you why do we have to do certain things, you have an understanding behind it, and holding me accountable to all the requirements, because that's my job, to make sure that EQS is followed and ESSA is followed. So the required policies under EQS, we have proficiency-based graduation policy, we have a class size policy, and then under ESSA is the Title I parental and family engagement. So if you've been on the board for a while, some of those were new. I know we had to adopt them in my previous district because of these law changes, but we're right on track with that, so good job. Continuous improvement plans, we talked about that a bit with Mike Berry a couple meetings ago. They have to be annual throughout the entire year. We're working on those. The AOE has just mentioned that we're moving into phase 2 without much definition of what that means for us. So this is most definitely a learning year for us as to how that improvement plan carries out, and for the AOE as to how they ensure that that improvement plan is carried out. It's a complete learning year. You do have to approve the CIPs. It's in the board. We can't submit it without your approval, so we will be bringing those to you probably in March, I would imagine, or April-ish. And then we have to submit it. The AOE then approves it. It has to do all the requirements of EQS and ESSA. So we're walking a fine line between those two. They get merged together and then they get split apart and merged together again. Just a little history, just in case anybody wants to geek out on this kind of stuff. This is the school improvement plan and what's happened in Vermont. It's getting more and more accountable to the state than it has been in the past. And here's another just historical perspective from what were the standardized tests that Vermont has required of us and why they were required across multiple years. So just now we're under ESSA, we have the SBAC will continue to meet that requirement in ESSA, which there is a requirement that says we do some sort of national standardized test. Vermont chose, as we said before, I believe, to move the SBAC from grade 11 to grade 9. There is a science as SBAC-like, I'm not sure exactly what they're calling it just yet. That will be in grades 5, 8, and 11. And they also added on an annual physical fitness exam for grades 4, 7, and 9. Last year was the first year that they did that. What's interesting about that piece is that that is not a requirement in ESSA. And under the federal law, there was the standardized testing and in addition, one other more standardized test that was up to states to decide. It was Vermont's decision to go with a physical fitness exam. That was their decision totally. So that you won't see across multiple states necessarily. Not really sure why they chose that over social studies or that over something else, but that's what they chose. For school accountability, again, a historical perspective. Now under Every Child Succeeds Act, it is required of states to name publicly the lowest 5% of performing Title I-A schools and will receive targeted support. Our state agency, the AOE, argued against that a lot. They really went to bat for schools to say that's not what we believe for education, that's publicly shaming people, that's not how we support institutions, but they lost. They lost with that. So that was a biggie that Vermont argued against. So the state does have to name the lowest 5% performing schools. I'm not worried that we're going to be in that 5%. And if we do become in the 5%, you should probably fire me. So, and then we have to report this annual snapshot that the agency is going to deliver to us. In last board packet, you had a memo from the Agency of Education about that annual snapshot. So you do have some information about that. Again, that's new, so we're all learning about what that's going to look like. And then the Ed Quality Review, which is the IFR that I discussed earlier. Montpelier-Roxbury is up in 2020, 2021 for that IFR. I actually kind of wanted it this year because they take a real broad view look at our system and you get good information off of it. So I actually wanted it to go this year, but we're not slated until 2020, 2021, which puts it in question based on Amy Fowler leaving. So I'm just not sure if that's actually gonna happen. But when it does, you all will probably be approached to give some information around that. According to the new state accountability system, this is the kind of fun stuff here. This is what the state of Vermont proposed to the feds to qualify under ESSA. So this was part of their state. So we will be accountable in 5 areas: academic proficiency, personalization, safe, healthy schools, high quality staffing, and investment priorities. And when they come to do that internal field review, these are the 5 areas we get feedback in. So it's all connected to this. So in academic achievement, the indicators that the state has chosen is that 20% is in ELA, 20% in mathematics, 5% in science, 5% in physical education or fitness. There's an when you have when you hit a threshold of ELL learners in your district, then that counts towards 10% of your scores. I'm not sure if we hit that or not yet. And graduation rate is 20%. In addition to college and career readiness indicators, and they're defining that in multiple ways. These are some of them. So it's the percentage of kids and their scores, how they're scoring, taking things like the ACT, SAT, AP classes. CLEP, I believe, is a military type examination. I'm not positive on that one, but nobody really uses it much anymore, so everyone was kind of like, when that came out, what's CLEP? Like, we didn't really know. Dual enrollment, that kind of thing. So that's 10% of our score in proficiency. Personalization, you guys know, all high school students participating, they're judging it as all high school students participating in at least one flexible pathway, that we have lots of flexible pathway offerings, and that we have personalized learning plans. Montpelier High School is doing a very good job with this piece right here. So, and they have for years.
Does that only apply to high schools then, the personalization aspect?
Middle schools too. This starts in 7th grade.
Okay.
But the most pressure will be put on high schools. Yeah. Safe and healthy schools. So they're going to look at our disciplinary data, and this is also the school climate survey. And I know some of us have had a conversation around the school climate survey in regards to the contractual language and my personal evaluation. So that's falling in safe and healthy schools, and they have developed the climate survey. We just started to get information. It's going to come out in April, they think, of this year. High quality staffing, they're defining as the amount of licensed teachers we have. Educational staff stability, so they're looking at teacher turnover, principal turnover, superintendency turnover, and then staff satisfaction surveys. We haven't heard any information about what that is yet. That's probably still being developed up there. But it's interesting because the caveat is in professional learning opportunities. So are they satisfied with what we're offering them as learners? It's interesting. And then investment priorities, staffing ratios, which our governor likes to talk about a lot, our per student expenditure, and what's our return on investment? So how are we doing in regards to the amount of money that we're spending towards education here in Montpelier-Roxbury? So those are the big 5. This is really interesting, and I'm not going to go into much detail about this. These have actually changed, and I haven't upped it because I didn't have the exact thing. This symbol has changed because of the violence that schools are experiencing right now, and they didn't feel like a symbol that had a violent background to it would be appropriate. So it's interesting. That will look different, but this is one of the ways that we're going to see where we fall, okay? And what's interesting about it, we referenced it a little bit with the SBAC presentation last year, is over here, this is talking to our growth, our year-to-year change, right? So we want to see our scores do that. This is talking about where our actual current performance is, okay? The number of schools, you see all these like 1 school, 6 schools, 9 schools, that was for if they were going to hold schools accountable according to the new ESSA plan last school year, based on 2 years ago now SBAC results. That's where the state of Vermont would land. Okay, so that's all the schools in Vermont. This is where, this priority 1 right here, this is where the 5% is. And if you fall in this 5%, you get lots of money thrown at you from the AOE and support. It's called targeted support. Everyone else will not be eligible for that money. So anywhere else, it doesn't matter where else you fall, you'll just be given support, which means the AOE will take a look at our continuous improvement plan and give us a thumbs up or thumbs down. If I were to bet based on what I was seeing from our SPEC scores, from the trends of what Mike showed you a couple weeks ago, I would have a hunch that we are off target or near target for the year-to-year change. We're down here, and we're probably near target for our current performance. We're probably down to the lower end here, so I would bet that we fall kind of here right now, but that's my hunch. I couldn't find, so I got this document from my old job. I couldn't find this document for Montpelier or for Roxbury, so it was literally just a document that was sent to us last year. So we couldn't, and Mike and I searched through lots of binders, we couldn't find it. So we're not sure where we would fall, but just based on what we know about this chart, we would fall around here. So we want to get over here, that way. So we'll see. Continuous improvement plan, we talked a bunch about this when we had to change ours. So like I said, right now we're moving into phase 2, and the AOE is hopefully going to give us some understanding of what that means to them, so we know what it means to us. We have some ideas, but we don't want to do things that's not going to fly with the AOE. So we're waiting to hear information about that. It's based on a Plan, Do, Study, Act kind of idea, which is not a bad idea. It's just really hard to put all of our investments into that framework. So it'll be interesting. We'll let you know when we know. And how are we responding to all this? So all our policies have been adopted. I'm working on the procedures now. As I work on those procedures, they're also updated on the school board website, so you can see those. We are working with school leaders a lot about needs assessments. We're putting in data days, which are going to be 3 times a year for the central office team to sit down with building leadership teams and say, this is what you're, show us evidence of how you're working towards our goal for each school. And then so we know exactly what our needs are for this. In addition to that, Friday is our first, what I'm calling round robin day. So it's myself, Mike Barry, and Mary Lundeen going to every single school and doing walkthroughs in classrooms with principals and talking about what are the themes of instruction we're seeing across our district, so we have a better idea of where we need to focus our professional learning. That's really exciting. That all feeds into this needs assessment process. We're participating in a lot of state trainings, much to Grant and Mike Barry's chagrin. And we're going to bring the continuous improvement plan to you guys for evidence and for review and for comments and what you're hearing. So just know that. Any questions about EQS and ESSA?
Questions?
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's good.
that was great.
Quick and relatively painless. Anyway.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Is that presentation part of the minutes? Because
It is not. I didn't think to include it in the packet, so I apologize for that. I will share it with all of you.
okay, that'd be great. So, budget.
Mr.
Grant?
So conversely, my presentation will be long and very painful, just so you know. I apologize. I apologize for not getting a piece of paper to you in advance, but you should have a piece of paper that says FY20 budget discussion in front of you. That I just kind of wanted to go over some of the landscape with you, some of the known landscape. I mean, we haven't really started any kind of deliberation, so there may be other things that pop up as the administration is looking at budget as we go along. But I started off with some statewide issues. Some of them may be old news to you, some of them may not. You may remember that in FY19, at the very end, the state decided to use a bunch of one-time money to balance the budget and reduce tax rates, which was great for us for FY19. Unfortunately, bad for us in FY20 because that's one-time money that isn't available again in FY20. So the estimate was that tax rates would go up by 2 cents even if even if budgets were level. That dynamic might be changing as we speak, though, but that's one statewide pressure. Statewide, pupil counts will likely go down. For us, I'm thinking we should be stable or fairly stable. If you've been here for a few years, you know that we've had big increases in equalized pupils. That largely related to preschool, private preschool, and being able to count those kids. Those kids, I think, have pretty much all been counted. That big ramp up of kids, I think, is pretty much all counted. So I don't think we can expect a big increase, but it should be fairly stable. And since tax rates are based on spending per pupil, that's a very important thing. Common level of appraisal, I put that in here, just the fact that if the CLA drops, tax rates rise. That's a typical phenomenon that we've seen year after year unless you go through a reappraisal. Health rates, that's something that just popped up this past week. In 19, we know that the tax rates, or the health rates went up 10%. In FY20, the number that VHI sent forward is proposing an 11.8% increase in health rates for the gold CDHP, which pretty much every one of our employees has the gold CDHP. So that is a fairly strong pressure statewide. Health clawbacks, whenever we went to these high deductible plans, the premiums were cheaper. You know, the state kind of for 2 years was pulling money back from us. This year in FY19 is the last year that happens. So this is a good thing. That $65,000 that we will lose in FY19, we don't lose again in FY20. Act 46, you know that we had an 8-cent tax incentive in our first year of merger, which is awesome. We have a 6-cent tax incentive in year 2, which is awesome, but unfortunately, most people are going to see that as a 2-cent increase, not a 6-cent incentive, since we are going from 8 to 6. So that's a bit of a challenge. Act 173, for those of you who don't know about it, it talks a lot about special education, not only about how funding will flow to us, but also about how to deliver special ed services. Act 173 is not going to impact the special ed funding formula until FY21, so it's not something we have to struggle with in FY20, but just to let you know that's coming. And in FY20, what we will likely be doing is trying to figure out how to build the capacity to adapt to kind of a new special ed delivery model that we'll be facing in FY21. The last one under statewide issues probably doesn't mean a whole lot to you. It's rocking my world. But, a uniform chart of accounts and a new HR finance system is going to be in place for July 1st of next year. That is a lot of work for our office to try to make that happen. I only bring it up not to get your pity, but to explain to you, well, no, that's good if you have any. What it might mean is because we have to go to a different chart of accounts, we may have to bucket expenses in different places. And as Steve knows, last year we did a pretty good job trying to map what the increases and decreases are from year to year, and we got pretty good into those details. That may be a little more tricky this year because some of that might be because something that we counted as a professional service now has to be counted as a supply. For example, software, some of that we may have counted as a professional service. Now we have to count it as a supply, which is a whole different kind of area of the budget. So it might be a little trickier whenever I'm showing you changes from year to year. Some of it may be because this new requirement popped up. Some of it may be because I had to move the P from this shell to this shell. We'll try to go through that as closely as we can.
You don't want to give us both versions, do you? So we can, so we can compare. But going forward after this, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Because they'll never change it again.
No, we're good from there on out. That's not true. So then the next thing is the pressures, which Libby pokes some fun at me for kind of maximizing the pressures, but salaries is on here. It's on here because over half of our budget is salaries. So even a modest increase in salaries is going to create a fairly significant cost increase. We just know that that's the fact. Staffing, I'm hoping that there won't be huge staffing implications related to enrollment projections. we look at that, look at class size averages. Sometimes we have to add a bunch of classroom teachers. Hopefully that's not the case. I think we're pretty stable. We'll have to see as that plays out. We are considering some other positions, which you can see on here. Human Resources Coordinator, we have 3 different people that, actually 4 if you count me, that do pieces of HR. We don't have one person that kind of acts as the one-stop shop for that. And that is getting more and more difficult, especially with HRAs and things like that. A district-wide instructional coach we're looking at now with Mike Berry coming on board. He's looking at some of our processes and some ways that we can improve student achievement and what that might look like. Consolidated federal grants, how we use those might change a little bit. I'm hoping it doesn't create a big increase in overall staffing costs. What it might mean is that I may not be allowed to use consolidated federal grants for someone who is a coach, but I may be able to use it for somebody who's an interventionist. So we may be shifting how we use the money, but the hope is that it nets itself out, hopefully. The bond, you know that in FY20, that's the first year that we have to pay principal, which is a pretty big jump. Vehicles, I think I'm going to cut that in half right now because I don't think we will look at doing another special ed van. We are looking at purchasing an additional van for CBL because they rely on community connections, and that may not be able to be an option in the future. So we may look at getting a second van for that. I'm taking off the special ed van because if you buy a special ed van with special ed money, you can only use it for special ed. If I buy a CBL van, I don't get reimbursement for it, but I can use it for whatever we want, which might include special ed requirements. So I think we can get by with one more van. I don't think we really need to. Busing, you just had a discussion about that. Yes, I did kind of go on the high end and say 250. I was thinking maybe it might be as many as 4 buses times 60 or so thousand. But it may not really be that high, depending on what the solution is. And Libby will tell you, we've had some issues with, adding the Roxbury busing, some of the issues that have popped up, and somebody will ask a question. So who do I need to talk to about this issue? Me, maybe? I don't know. We don't have someone who handles busing because it's never been that big of a thing. It was only union, so it was really school-based. So now that there's a bigger transportation monster to deal with, we need to sort through roles and responsibilities and see if anybody has the capacity right now to take on that kind of work. So that's something else to just think about as we problem solve that. Foreign languages on here for maybe a study committee, and it's a study committee to look at something that is kind of exciting, the possibility of an immersion program. So that would be really cool. Yay!
I told you that would be Bob.
Boy, it took that long to get yay. Data management, we have various data management tools, but we really don't have something to be able to keep good track for assessments and be able to document assessments and monitor those across time. So we're looking at trying to find a good assessment tracking system to purchase. Elementary equity is something we talked about during the merger study. It's something that we're going to continue to look at now that we're operating 2 K-4 schools, pre-K-4 schools. There may be some other areas of inequities that we might need to budget for to try to fix as we go along. 504 requirements is really on here for me more than you. It's just that if you have students that aren't on an IEP, then you can't use special ed funding for it. So we try to put a little bit of a set aside in general funds to deal with 504 type of requirements, which might be adaptive equipment and things like that. It may also mean an outside placement that's not for a special ed eligible student. So I know that we have over-executed this line, and I just need to put a little more into there, at least for the next few years, so that we're not overextending ourselves. The back side of this page talks about opportunities. Yes, the list is a little shorter, but there is a list, Libby.
I still have pressure on these opportunities.
Facilities projects, we talked last year during the budget process that we had increased some one-time costs in facilities because we knew we were gonna lose 2 cents worth of incentive. We knew we were gonna have to pay for the bond. So we had one-time facility project money in there that we think we can back off a little bit. With a new facilities director, I need to work with him to figure out what the appropriate amount is to back off. But I do think we have extra money there that we can reduce. High school tuition, the kids that are grandparented in Roxbury that have choice, that we have one less year of those kids that have choice, which means one less year of tuition. So we know that is gonna go down. Health reimbursement arrangements, in FY19, we budgeted 100% utilization, partially because of the clawback that we knew we were gonna have to deal with, but also because we really didn't have data to know where we were gonna end up. I do know that in half the year, we spent over half of the HRA money that we had in the bucket. But, you know, a lot of that is people who spent that full amount. So I assume that percentage is gonna drop off in the second half of the year. I think we can probably scale back from 100% utilization, but I don't wanna get too carried away because we really still don't even have a year's worth of data. So we might be able to back that off some. Fund balance, you saw the draft fourth quarter report last month that we do have a surplus from last year, so we do have some fund balance. We do want to kind of hold some of that because with a $4.9 million bond, there's things that are going to come up. We want to make sure that we don't shortchange anything to do with bond projects, so we might want to have some of that set aside in case we need it for furnishings and equipment and things that we didn't count on or change orders, things like that. But we do have some money that we might end up considering taking some fund balance and using it as a revenue source in the FY20 budget. So for every dollar we put in as a fund balance revenue, that's like taking $1 of expense off. So the good thing is it has that action. The bad news is this could end up becoming one of those one-time things where if you put $400,000 of fund balance in a revenue for FY20 and in FY21 you don't have $400,000, that's like increasing your budget by $400,000. So there's probably it's a lever that you can kind of adjust. If we are close to where we want to be, we can maybe throw a little bit of fund balance revenue into the budget to offset expenses. So I think that's kind of it as far as those pieces. There's one other aside I wanted to point out, and that is that typically in the budget, we show prior year actuals compared to a budget and then the new proposed budget. We weren't able to do that last year because of the merger. Just so you know, I still won't be able to do that because I still don't own the Roxbury data for last year. So I still don't really have actuals to be able to show you for FY18 because that wasn't under our system. I have Montpelier FY18 actuals, but not Roxbury. So we still are probably going to be dealing with presenting a budget that shows from one budget year to the next budget year. And then next year, we'll have actuals in FY19 to be able to show you some actuals compared to budgets. Just wanted to set that expectation. We do have on here kind of a proposed guidance that if basically for you to tell us if this is what you think is reasonable for us to consider all requirements that would improve student learning based on the continuous improvement plan and those that would improve efficiency and effectiveness of the district. To prioritize those requirements with the goal to limit the increase in education spending to 4% in order to keep tax rates at a reasonable level. In the past, we've talked about spending per pupil, but then we don't know what the pupil count is until late in the game, so it's very hard to figure that out. If we left it at just education spending, we can kind of try to work within those bounds. I think 4% hopefully is something that's would be viewed as reasonable without really constraining us too much as far as looking at all the real requirements that we want to bring forward for the sake of the kids. Did I miss anything, right?
You did awesome.
Any thoughts?
Questions? Bridget?
I know it's tough because of the district changes, so maybe this number doesn't exist, but can you give me a sense of how the district increase, what the increases in education spending have been year year over year for the last couple of years? Because it's not a number we usually talk about at this point.
Yeah, I could, I don't have it off the top of my head. I think it went up, you know, a little more than usual last year because of the incentive for the merger. But I think the year before that, we were trying to keep it at about a 3% increase in per pupil spending. I'm thinking it was around there. It may have been a little more than that. I'd have to go back and look, but we can certainly cover that as part of the budget presentation, the historical look of where we've been increasing, with the caveat that that's where Montpelier has been, and now we're Montpelier-Roxbury, so this is the first year that we really have seen any kind of change in spending per pupil for the new district.
Steve?
I'm learning to trust your guidance, your proposed guidance,
Thank you.
because you do a great job, and you find that balance between being, you know, recognizing that we want to always be improving and investing, and we also want to be projecting 2, 3, 4 years out in terms of what impacts that's going to have on tax rates, because that's a quagmire. And so, but it's quite bold to put out to limit to 4% this early. And it's always something we always have a good fight about on the board. And, you know, I hate to not have a fight. So what I'm trying to determine is what 4% is based on.
I'm just always used to about 3%. And I knew you were going to be sitting there. So, I was just trying to think about what might be realistic, knowing that because the CLA is going to drop, the actual tax rate is going to go up even more.
Yeah.
And so we know that. And it's the second year of a merger, and we are trying to kind of hold true to what we showed as part of the merger presentation. And my concern was 3% might constrain administrators a little bit too much to come up with some good ideas that might really turn a corner on achievement somehow. So I didn't want to say 3%, but I just couldn't bring myself to say 5, so I called it 4.
Nor
Not
6.
technical.
6 would have been hard too. You need a little help with that one. Okay, no, I get that. I mean, when we look through your numbers and your discussion about what's going good and bad right now, it's not looking very balanced. And so I know we're going to have some pressures on the upside just to hold even. But I also know that you're really good at being careful with numbers so that you don't promise things that can't be delivered. And so I just, you know, and I also don't see a lot of, this isn't a pejorative, I don't see a lot of ambition in this. Does that sound bad? In the sense that you're not saying, well, we need to add 7 positions or something like that.
Not yet.
Right. So, and it's very, very, very early. No one's holding anyone to anything at this point, but I guess at this point, I'm just trying to understand that 4% and at what point and to what extent does the board actually give this guidance? And what did we decide on that? I don't remember.
Last year we did it, I think it was the first meeting in October, didn't
Well, yeah, but we weren't necessarily, we were trying to dance around this idea of.
And I think, and last year, to kind of go back in time a little bit, last year when there was, as part of the guidance, or not guidance, as part of the policy, you had to give me a number. And
Yes.
this year, I don't think we're that constrained. That's why I tried to word it as if this is a goal. The goal is to limit to 4%. If somebody comes in with a great idea that we think is gonna close the achievement gap in 1 year,
Yeah.
well, I'm gonna come to you with a 5% then if that's what it takes. But I would like to try to, I mean, this is more of a challenge to us as a leadership team to just try to make sure that we're really focused on prioritizing, because if it gets much more than 4% in education spending, depending on what happens with equalized pupils and the dollar yield, a 4% increase in education spending could still be an 8, 9, 10% increase in the tax rate, which I don't want to get to that point.
And we're in negotiations this year.
True.
Bridget?
So we haven't adopted the budget policy yet, but it's in the agenda for tonight, and it doesn't call on the board to have a specific number. And I just wanted to throw out a different way to think about the guidance for the board's consideration. which is that if the administration has been, you know, looking at this issue and it's coming to us and saying, this is where we are now, that perhaps it's not an opportunity for us to endorse it, but an opportunity for us to object to it. Or not. And if we don't, then, you know, you could look at it that way. And that might be a more respectful way to look at the administration's role, that they're telling us where they are and they're giving us a heads up of what path they're going down. If the board wanted to step in at that point and say, wait a minute, we're not happy with that, or we have real concerns, we could, or we could just respect the role that they're going down and let the path proceed. And that might be more consistent with the policy, since the policy doesn't call for us to specifically give them.
The hard part is, at what point in the timeline do we object? Because this is something that in past, I'm going back a few years now, the administration has felt caught in a bad situation around proceeding down a planning path, building a consensus within the administration or within the district, and then having the board come in at the 11th hour and say, you know, that's not enough, you know, we shouldn't, in a contraction year, for instance, you know, we're gonna need to eliminate half a position. The board's like, no, you're not eliminating that position. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, holy crap. Or the other way around, like, hey, I really wanna do foreign language immersion, and the administration's like, we're not there. And so 4%'s not enough. And so the objection can't come too late, is what I'm saying, or the guidance can't come late in the process. It's gotta come out early enough that the administration can do its work. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out a way to not be that monkey wrench.
Yeah, I actually like the way this is presented, and I have some reservations about kind of putting in a random number. I mean, I like the fact that I have a sense of what you're considering. I think given where you are with, you know, reassessing the district and looking for efficiencies and looking for, you know, whether the current structure is working well, I actually think there is some ambition here. I think the idea of taking chipping away at the foreign language block that we always talk about and make no progress on is big. I think the idea of starting to look at transportation is big. The human resource coordinator, while perhaps not sexy, I think has some real administrative advantages that can pay off down the road. And I like the fact that, at least compared to other years, I have a better sense of what you're thinking about. I mean, and I think this is kind of consistent with where the budget policy is going, I'm okay with getting guidance about what the ticket items are you're thinking about investing in, whether we agree with those, and then just a general sense of, you know, whether they're gonna present numbers that are gonna be eye-popping or not, rather than saying, you know, 5%, 6%, 3%, 4%. I think if we have a direction, idea of the direction you're going, an idea of the priorities that you want to fund, how that fits in with kind of a broader vision, and whether there's going to be some price tags in there that are going to be difficult. I think at this point in the budget, that's kind of what I'm looking for.
Yes. Maybe Grant, just to clarify, when I'm reading this as recommendations coming from you with your knowledge on what's happening in the district. You know, this doesn't include what principals are expecting to hopefully implement next year. Like, this isn't principals' budgets. This is really just kind of the big picture. This is what's happening in the district.
This is big picture. We
So
have
we
talked
still-
about it with our leadership team.
Right.
We're not showing you anything we haven't showed them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. There is still time to have shifts and changes, and
Oh, yeah.
it's still very early. We have.
Yeah, because there could be something that bubbles up
Right.
instead of, you know, gets pushed down. Whenever I send these budget worksheets, I send them to the buildings. They work with their teams. So there could be something that we didn't anticipate, but as Libby mentioned, this is something we already talked about as a leadership team. So everybody already had kind of an idea so that they had an opportunity to raise their hand and say, you completely missed this huge thing. So I'm hoping that there isn't a big unknown in here, but there might be several small unknowns.
And with the budget timeline that I believe we shared with you a while back, that Grant put together a long time ago, there are several opportunities for our leadership team to be working on more specifics of the budget, that we will be doing, and Jim and my relationship is such that I tell him pretty much everything that's going on, so if he feels that's a time that needs to be brought to the board level at a different than this timeline, then I know he will speak up.
So, and I'm comfortable without you, like, making a motion to give me guidance. As long as I'm not getting stuff thrown at me right now, I think we're able to start doing our work.
Okay. Are we okay, just kind of?
You had something you wanted to say?
Well, I was gonna say, this is great, and just to echo what Jim said, that what you provided is great. And I was actually just gonna follow up on the point about where is this in terms of ambition. There were a couple different, reactions to that, and my additional reaction is that I think that there's a lot of great stuff here, and obviously a lot of serious things being considered. I would be shocked if this were the year that the administration came to us with an ambitious programmatic budget. I mean, that's just, this isn't the year for it, and so we're still learning stage, geez. I'm comfortable with this being a stable, like, we're building on what we've got, and the new team is assessing things, and they'll be in a better position next year if there's big changes.
Steve?
I think what I'm experiencing, I'm realizing I'm having this emotional experience because this is a very collaborative process, and I'm not used to that. I think it's very interesting that we don't feel the need to really carefully define everything at this early stage, and that I think the board's feeling a lot of trust, honestly, in both of you and the team. And I think that I think this may go a lot smoother than my past experiences have been. And so I think it might just be that that's where we leave it, is that it sounds like Libby really and Grant really want to lead a collaborative process here, and and I'm sure you'll tell us when we overstep, and that's appropriate. And so let's watch it play out and learn something this year.
Great. Well,
Thank you so much.
thank you so much. Grant.
Thank you.
So next piece of budget is community outreach expectations for the board. Tina, not shockingly, wants to go talk to the senior center. If anybody wants to join her, I think she'd definitely be welcome to that suggestion. I'm good reaching out to FOMs. In fact, I've already prompted Nathan to get something together sooner rather than later, so it can be put in meaningfully. Other groups people want to reach out to? I'm assuming you guys want to do some outreach to Roxbury.
That would be good. When we have usual PTO, senior selects. I don't think. Yeah, we can reach out. It's different in Roxbury. Just leave it at that.
I'm happy to do some, Rotary, Montpelier Live, MBA, all that kind of stuff. I can try to work some of the business people over.
And they traditionally have the response that's been.
We don't want to hear about it.
Very conservative.
No, it was supposed to be like whatever.
Yeah.
We're busy. We don't want to hear about the school.
Okay.
Rotary's not like that. They would be interested, and we haven't really done that. We did that with the Roxbury committee, the merger project. We did reach out to them, and that was very useful. No, we haven't done that much. So, but I'm happy to just at least touch base and
Yeah, I think it's good to touch base.
ask people what they want to know.
Bridget, Becky, any desire to or ideas?
I'm glad to have that wherever. Yeah, I've gone to the senior center as well sometimes, and I'm happy to do that again. And I can help with phones. I know, 'cause sometimes we've tried to just have this, someone will be at the coffee shop for a couple of hours. I don't know how often people have turned up.
I think it is. It's like 1 or 2 people will show up is usually what it is, and it's like where Tina will hold court, kind of, and people come. And you know, if you got somebody who's especially interested, that person needs to have answers, cause they're gonna tell 400 other people what they're worried about.
Mhm.
Is there a good place to tap into, the community of people with, you know, children, young children, not yet in the school system?
Well, I wonder if,
Through the private-
Turtle Island or Children's
Through all the
House,
private
off-
childcare places, there could be something
like
going
from
through
5
those.
to 5:30, just around pick up or drop off.
Or just, maybe just a note going out to all of them, or posted with, they're handed to every one of them saying there's gonna be a, you know, parents of young children meeting about what's going on in the, you know, with the school right now. That would be a bit of a project, but there's,
I think it's pretty much Turtle Island and Children's House
And
and
lots of
private
small
providers, yeah.
private providers.
Yeah, some small private.
You can do the hospital or the doctor's offices. It's not gonna get everybody, but
Yeah.
That's a group that it would be nice to connect with.
Yeah.
I'll try to figure out some ways to do that.
You know,
So
Down
it's
Street
about-
Health could help. Down Street Health might be a good place to congregate for that community.
yeah.
I can look into that.
I mean, you said it's about the Frankfurt Forum too, could you get a
Mhm.
venue like,
Right.
you know,
I'll reach out to Down Street.
What's our timeline for that?
what would you like? It's October 3rd to 15th, kind of a list, right?
For,
For kind of input
Overview.
that's meaningful to the
I'd say
process.
definitely when we pull, the leadership team together to really start talking about staffing and personnel and stuff like that, Grant has that scheduled for October 17th. So mid-October would be good.
So we've got an October 15th meeting, so, we, is there a meeting October 15th?
Yep.
or-
October 17th
October
is in
17th.
Roxbury.
Okay.
In the past, I've gone to the parents groups. And it's always a timing issue, but the boosters at the high school, Main Street Middle School, and the Union
yes.
Parents Group, is there a Roxbury?
there is a Roxbury
Parents
meeting.
group?
Yeah.
Is that something you'd be able to
Yep.
contact? Is anyone else interested in doing parents groups?
I would,
Yeah, I wouldn't mind.
yeah, I'll help with the,
So what's the upcoming fundraiser on Columbus Day weekend? Has the board done anything?
That's such an interesting thought.
The which one?
The Fall
The Fall
Festival.
Festival.
Is that what it's called?
It's a great idea.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever's happening, yeah.
What-
Drop
We
boxes,
could have a
or
little,
public
like,
boxes,
come here and
or-
talk to school board members or
sure
something.
Wow. Exciting.
That's brilliant.
What, I'm
The
sorry,
Fall
at this
Festival.
early, what is it we're communicating?
We're asking.
We're
We're
asking,
asking.
we're not
Okay.
communicating.
We're not
What are we
We're-
asking?
We're
I mean,
receiving.
We know how this works, open-ended questions sometimes
Well, I
get
mean, I
blank-
think we-
get blank stares.
well, the good thing is we can give a quick overview of what the, you know, we've got this, so we can spend a few minutes saying, here are the things that the administration is.
We're really worried about the clawbacks, and the Act 173 is gonna have an impact this year, and
We're thinking about transportation issues.
Thinking about transportation
That was-
issues, we're
yeah,
considering
something
about,
else.
you know, getting something started on foreign language.
Health insurance.
Human resources coordinator. And just kind of give the lay of the land. And we can also just say, this is a year where we are merging two districts and, examining systems and how things are coming together and what the efficiencies are and how we can
Yeah, I mean,
use
if-
what we have to achieve.
It's the 25th.
I mean, if we were talking about this with somebody and we weren't trying to just give them a list of new things, I think it would have to be that. It's like, we're gonna monitor the merger first year, make sure we're successful, evaluate how that's working on the budget. The bond is
Yep.
getting going, we need to be cautious about bond expenses and just be aware that, you know, we're gonna find things along the way. And then, always, just keep holding healthcare and staff costs basically level means they go up, and they don't go up a little bit, it just, you know, healthcare, between these two, it looks like, what, $500,000 or something? And, you know, to do nothing, it's $500,000 more. And then, you know, and then probably, you know, that we're gonna continue to work on equity, which is sort of our long-standing, thing, so everything is put through that lens. You know, I mean, those aren't like, creating your list of new things.
Yeah.
So I mean, I just would be careful at this early stage to get people too jazzed up about anything that, like busing is a great example, right? Like where we're definitely looking at doing some new things with busing. That's about all we know at this point.
We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, and you know, for them to say, oh, you're putting $250,000 in for busing. It's like, So we just have to be, I think, cautious of how much we, you know, it's not that this isn't a public document, it's just that it's definitely kind of a throw everything out there and make sure everything's on the table, but it doesn't mean all these things will have impacts.
Yeah. I think that's right.
Jim, do we need to have anything summarized in terms of feedback to present at the 14th? Are we gonna have time with that 17th meeting just to kind of share individually, or do you wanna have things kind of compiled?
I think we can do it, in the past we've done it orally.
Okay.
If you wanna be more organized than that certainly wouldn't be discouraged, but I wanna make this easy, and I think that, you know, people have come back with a pretty good sense of what they've heard.
My experience in the boards in the past have been it's fairly generic in terms of the feedback we get. So I could be wrong this time around, but my guess is it would probably be, the usual stuff.
Yeah. No,
better food, better busing,
But
more language.
but the Roxbury piece is so important this time that we just continue to have our ear to the ground on that.
Yeah.
Like, how we doing?
Perfect. Granted, we can check it out the third about how we're doing, but I'm definitely happy to do whatever with the students groups meetings. And I'm impressed with Leslie, so I can talk to her about it. So, policy readings. Relatively well done. So we've got budgeting, board superintendent relationship, board expectations, and superintendent expectations. So, let's start with budgeting. My budgeting copy has gone awry. Discussion, read budget policy. Bridget.
Just one typo that I want to point out, in the budget presentation format,
Yep.
the 6th bullet, I think is supposed to be a continuation of the 5th bullet, and not its own bullet.
Oh, yes.
That was all.
Language question.
Fly.
The TV thing, I'm hitting my face, but it's actually a fly. It's a fly.
So cruising around.
Yeah, I had a opportunity to end it, but I decided to freak out.
What's bothering us?
But I will pass
Go
it
ahead,
on. I
Ryan.
will
You're
pass it
digressing
on.
over here, go ahead.
First question I have, the opening paragraph, the final statement, the budget will be presented by the board for approval by the voters at the annual meeting of the district. Do we mean warned there? The budget will be warned for vote? Or are we talking about presentation, as in us standing up presenting?
I think we're talking about the voting day.
Which item is that?
The budget,
It's in the paragraph after the bullets.
I felt like that was a little bit unclear. We talked so much about presentations later, and It's like, is this just talking about us putting forward a budget to be voted on?
I think that is
That's-
what it's talking about.
Right.
And you're right, that because, and for Montpelier in particular, it's new wording, because we didn't really call it a meeting before in Montpelier. It was town
Yeah.
meeting day, but it was a, you know, an election.
Yep.
It's still Australian ballot, but I don't know, if people will realize that that really means that you show up to vote as you always have, as opposed to
Right.
showing up to a meeting.
But we're still presenting it to the voters for approval.
What if we said the budget will be presented by the board for approval by the voters on town meeting day? Or something.
That would clarify for me
Yes.
what we're actually talking about, rather than not just another
Yeah.
physical presentation
So
of
just
us.
scratch out at the annual meeting of the district and just put on town meeting day.
On meeting.
That works.
Okay.
And related, in our schedule, December and January, we say December, the first budget presentation. Is it the first draft budget presentation, or is it the first presentation of the budget?
It's the first.
Because in January, we have the second budget presentation. Is that the second draft, or is that just us presenting the budget for the second time
It's the administration presenting to us.
to us?
Yeah.
Okay,
Superintendent
So
and
it's-
business manager present initial budget in December
That's
fifth.
it,
Yeah.
because it will be revised in there.
that's,
Yeah.
yeah, like I said, I knew that's what it was, but the way it was worded, it made me think that it was just, this is presentation number 2 of the same thing, rather than
No, it says.
a revised, updated draft. Okay. Those are the only things that I thought were a little bit confusing. So.
Further comments on, and when, just for clarification, you asked for verbal clarification, but didn't make any editing clarifications. Do you think it needs editing clarifications after having it explained to you, or not?
Like I said, it's the first presentation by, like I said, I'm the only one that read it that way, that it might just be
No,
a sequence of one or
it's
two
ambiguous.
presentations.
First draft, second draft.
Like I said, I had,
We can add the word draft in there.
Yeah.
right, like the
just
first
draft,
draft budget
draft.
present, or the first, budget
Although-
draft presentation.
Although being realistically, it's implied, because in January after this too, the board adopts the budget, so clearly the budget prior to that is not an adopted budget, which would imply it was a draft budget.
Right.
But it could also be that the idea is that you're like reading it 3 times, right? Like that it's in final, it's gotta be close to final format somehow. And that you're just offering multiple opportunities for everyone to hear the presentation and ask questions, but that's not what we're trying to achieve here.
No.
It's kinda like the way we used to interpret the policy change policy. It's like, no, you can keep revising as you go. And and I think it should be clear, either draft or initial, I think Libby said, or something like that, just it makes it
Revise.
clear we're in draft, we're still in revision period.
Right, until that final presentation.
Initial, revised, or draft, or,
Draft might be easiest.
I don't think it should say first draft, cause that's not true, you're working internally long before then.
Yeah, but are you, getting more confusing, is it the first draft, or is the
It's
first
the first presentation
draft
of.
budget?
It's the first
It's the
presentation
first
of the
presentation of the
proposed.
draft.
Oh, yeah, how about that, that's good, first presentation of
Yes.
proposed budget.
Yeah, I'm not sure that gets you there.
Well, you have to change second too.
Yeah, then you have to
Do
say
it
something
one
about
more time.
revision or revised or something in the second one.
What if you don't revise it?
As long as it's clear, we're in a revision period, that's all that really matters.
But Jim is right, though, I mean, technically it could come back without a revision. I mean, it's possible.
Yeah, case file.
Yeah.
What do you think, Grant?
How about proposed and potentially,
In December would be good.
Chris, as long as I know when to be there, I don't know what it's called.
I mean, we have been presenting them as first draft, second draft, as we go along, so that's typical language for me to be familiar with.
That works then. They're good with it.
In my mind, it's more clear. Yeah. So.
So what
So
did we
this
just
is-
agree on?
You just
Adding
put
draft.
draft after first and
Adding
second.
draft,
Yeah.
not proposed, okay. Okay,
So
that works, works for me too.
Could I make one other quick change?
Yeah, go
or
for it.
recommendation? On the budget presentation format, the third bullet says indicates anticipated amounts and sources of revenues from sources other than local taxation. We did an education spending grant that includes local and state. To me, it would just be indicates anticipated amounts and sources of revenues, period.
Yeah,
Okay, that's,
that works.
yeah. Other comments, questions, concerns? Ready to turn to board superintendent relationship?
Is this ready to be adopted next time?
I think so.
It should be.
My adoption woman over there is telling me yes. So yes.
Board superintendent relationship? Comments, questions, suggestions, concerns?
So on, in 1.4, this is just because of the editing process, we now have two sentences that say almost the same thing.
yeah. I noticed the same
I wonder
thing.
if we should axe the first sentence, or somehow pick what we like best for each sentence.
Yeah, I think if we if we transition, define the respective roles of the board and superintendent into that following statement, yeah, it cuts the length almost in half. Because I think that's the only thing that's really different between the two.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right. So the proposal is to take the phrase, define the respective roles of the board and superintendent out of the first sentence, otherwise axe the first sentence, and insert that phrase, maybe as the second.
So we're moving.
Second clause in.
So we're getting rid of the first part of the first sentence, moving define to,
After, I think to after objectives of the district, and to for direct and limit.
yeah, that makes sense.
Jim, when I was reviewing this today, 1.6, process for the board evaluating the superintendent annually. We at this point in time have a standing superintendent evaluation committee that isn't mentioned at all in this process. I think,
This is true.
I don't have a recommendation on exactly what language to include, but I do think we need to have something that does reference the work of the superintendent evaluation committee will be used in our deliberations and evaluation.
So, I would say the board will conduct a formal evaluation of the superintendent each year, but based upon the work of the superintendent evaluation committee and a schedule adopted by the board's annual work plan.
I think just to have that reference would be good enough.
So the recommendation of the committee.
It might fit better in the second sentence.
Just before we, the language, in the other committee we say, do we wanna be consistent and say the board will create and charge a standing superintendent evaluation committee?
So I didn't say anything about it in the budget policy, but
Okay.
committees is something that did get added and modified in the expectation policy that's coming up next. I feel like we're jumping between discussions now, but the way I had drafted that change of the committee information and the expectation policy is that would be kind of the one-shop location for these are our standing committees.
Okay.
I had thought that it might make sense to tweak the budget policy a little bit to, that would be assuming that we adopted the language that was in the expectations policy. But I think the expectations policy would be, these are the standing committees, these are the structures for ad hoc committees. So we wouldn't have to have language scattered around in other policies for the committees.
I like that.
But, yeah, sorry, just kind of jumping between discussions that I
Yeah.
had thought about in the budget policy, but didn't think it was too relevant.
Okay. So it's based upon the recommendation Dan was given.
Okay.
Other suggestions, and just following up on that. Do you want to put in there specifically that the board shall form this committee?
That's actually in the next
It's in the,
document.
yeah,
It's
that's
in
what
the
I,
next
that's what
document.
I.
That's how the-
Okay.
We'll have that in all of
Yeah, the
one place.
language,
Okay.
from what I read in
That-
Robert's
that makes
rules and
sense.
some other policy examples, if you have standing committees, it's something that doesn't get played around with much. And having, essentially in a board's bylaws, this is where you declare that these are the standing committees for a board.
Okay, perfect, all right.
So,
Thanks for reiterating that. Obviously, flew over my head the first time. Other questions or comments? I think this also is up for,
Is that up for adoption too?
Yeah.
I believe so, I think
Yep.
it was introduced in as budget.
no major substantial change.
Okay. We ready to move on to board expectations?
I have a question.
Yes.
Under B1, we had clerk treasurer in the Montpelier school system, but in the merged system, we do not, I don't think. Clerk treasurer.
So we do have elected officers, not officers, but we do have elected officials. And so we elect a clerk, we elect a treasurer.
Okay.
We don't as a board, but the district does.
So it's, yeah,
So Shelley Quinn, Tammy Legacy are our clerk and treasurer,
So it's not a board appointment, it's an
It's-
election.
But
elected by the
Mhm.
voters.
but it's in
Um,
office.
But I'm a little bit unsure whether or not it makes sense for us to define here what those roles are. Because I had actually asked Grant before the meeting started this evening. I'm a little bit unclear how Shelley, as a district treasurer right now, really differs from a board-appointed treasurer in the past who would have signed off on board orders and warrants, et cetera. So I'm a little bit unclear myself really what the difference is between a board-appointed versus a selected official.
And they're not, like, this section is called board officers, but they're not board officers.
They're not in board,
district
right.
officers.
They're their own thing.
Yeah, and they're not
Yeah.
on the board.
Yep.
So it should be district
So why is it-
officers.
So I would be inclined to not have them here.
Yeah,
Because I
that
feel
would
like
be my
it's a
inclination
creature
too.
of state law and whatever their responsibilities are.
Yeah.
It's
are
there.
We
fine
can't
there, and
trump
they're
that.
not, we
Yep.
can't trump it and they're not really part of the board.
Yep.
So what do we want to
Okay.
do with it?
I would
Just not
recommend
even
just
include them.
taking out.
Yep,
Mhm.
they're not on the board.
Yeah, I think that makes most sense.
Yep.
Did we appoint a parliamentarian?
We did. Yeah, I was appointed
Is it you?
parliamentarian
Sorry.
in October.
I remember
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, it's been,
Yep. And I did get
Duties to read his Robert's rules ever since.
Right, so there were, it's here, I have not read it, yeah. It's a very dry reading, believe it or not. I mean, I'm a bit surprised, but. It was funny because section B3 there, the responsibilities of the other board officers. We really fleshed out, it's amazing how much we've changed this policy and all the revisions. We've added a lot. After the retreat, we really added a lot in terms of the role of the board chair. And we realized that we had neglected to include information regarding the other officers. So I pulled, the language that's in here now is essentially verbatim from what had been included in the Montpelier policy in the past, which was fairly generic and dry. And I know whenever Michelle had talked to me about the parliamentarian office, it was essentially the general, occasionally questions come about Robert rules and motions and addendums, et cetera, and occasionally the parliamentarian would fill in that information. And when I was trying to get more information for the actual duties and responsibilities of these different positions, I couldn't find anything about parliamentarians. And it turns out, according to Robert's rules, the parliamentarian isn't normally a member of the board. It's an outside counsel who's essentially hired by the board to serve as professional support. So it's usually not a board-appointed position. That's why there's not a lot of information about responsibilities, because it's typically a appointed professional who can fill in detailed information regarding questions.
He gets paid to read Robert's rules.
Yes.
Sent doing it voluntarily.
All those things they probably don't talk about as high school and career day, right? So the vice chair, I think, was fairly straightforward in terms of just filling in behind the chair. But there is in that section B1, and then also the clerk, recorder section, we haven't defined, I don't think, who our secretary or recorder is. I think it's been kind of by default Heather's position, but we haven't actually declared who our secretary is, who's responsible for making sure minutes are taken care of. I think it's fine that we have the superintendent's assistant do that, but it does make sense for us to declare who that is at some point. So I would recommend that we probably either elect from the board a secretary whose responsibility is to ensure that the superintendent's assistant is taking minutes or that they're posted, et cetera. But it does make sense for us to have somebody designated as secretary or recorder from the board.
Do we have to be careful about that in terms of our ability to supervise that position? It seems that we would actually appoint the superintendent to do that using her staff, basically.
Sure.
So in other words, we turn it back as an administrative function rather than choosing an individual.
Which I think is fine, as long as it's declared at some point that this is who is taking responsibility for that task.
Really?
Under the parliamentarian on 4, I guess it's not clear to me that legally the parliamentarian can act in the chair's place. I'd have to check, but my recollection was that for the vice chair, that's in the statute.
Do you know which statute?
I have to
Because
look at that.
Perform all duties legally assigned to the office.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen that somewhere, that it's the job of the vice chair is to assume the duties assigned to the chair if the chair can't act.
Yeah, that is right.
I'm not sure.
That can be
I feel like if
passed
both the
down.
chair and the vice chair were unable to act, the board might have to,
Postpone the meeting.
or appoint it, or the board could,
An interim
somebody else.
president or something. Yeah, like I said, when I was sent you guys drafts on this, that was something that I indicated that I honestly don't know what law this is referring to, that the parliamentarian clerk treasurer are more clear, but what duties are legally assigned to that office?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask.
Do we need some
So we need
administrative advice on this? Like consult somehow with someone?
I wonder if we could also
We're
just
just gonna check.
draft a catch-all, which is, if they're legally assigned duties to the vice chair, have legally assigned duties to the vice chair, and then just a catch-all like other offices shall assume the duties appointed to them by the board, if there's not a law that defines what the duties are.
And it's not, I was thinking, if we wanted to be clear about why we have a parliamentarian, we could have language that just said something like, provide an informal source of guidance on, procedural matters.
Right. Because Because there are other offices that Robert's rules recommend, like sergeant of arms. Some boards have like
Right.
librarians, like curators, like, right? Like I said, it is kind of up for us to decide like which offices we want to include. Now, you obviously have to have chair and vice chair, but yeah, the parliamentarian, in my mind, feels like we should have a better description of what is that person supposed to be doing, rather than just filling a title.
So, Ryan, you're not sure that parliamentarian is required under statute?
No.
And clerk treasurer is not necessarily required under statute?
Well,
The district is, but that's not what we're talking about.
Right, that would be board, and I don't think, well, so all boards have chair, vice chair, and at least a secretary. Secretary has been analogous terms, recorder, clerk, but it seems like those three offices are essentially required.
Under statute?
For the board? Or for the district?
So this
For
is
the
Sounds like
board.
we need more research.
For the board,
Yeah.
for any committee, basically.
For any committee or for any board?
I should say.
for any
yeah.
board, yes.
Any governing board or whatever. It seems like we need to do some research to figure out what's required, minimum.
Yeah.
Does anyone know where to easily find the document that we adopted at the convening of the district? At
It's-
first, when we had that first meeting of the district at which then the board was formed?
It's in the minutes. So we declared that we were gonna operate by Robert's rules that night.
Yeah.
We elected district clerk, a district treasurer. I don't think I remember, we appointed board chair, vice chair. We went through appointments of offices that night, but I don't
We
remember reading.
It wasn't part
Where
of
did-
that, but.
Where do we keep the district book? District minutes book?
Yes, Heather has it.
Does the
That would
school
be-
district,
That would be Tammy Legacy as district clerk.
does that go onto our website? Just to confuse everyone that that's the district and not the board? I mean, I think
That
that
was the only meeting of the district. other
that's
than the
once a
day that
year,
we
right,
voted.
or something that the district meets?
Essentially.
Yeah.
But there's official things that have been decided, and somewhere that should be accessible.
So, Jim, is that something you could follow up Tammy on?
Let's see. Libby, can I ask, do you have any recommendations on best resources to go to for answering these questions regarding the offices? And what's required?
I would say the VSBA would be
Yeah.
would be the place I go to.
Okay.
Particularly Susan, can't remember Sue's last name off the top of my head.
I know who you're
I'll get
talking
it.
about, yeah.
Yeah, the attorney. Yeah, let me know if you need help with that, Ryan. I've been to do those things, so.
She's very responsive.
That's good.
And thorough, too. More on expectations, board expectations? Okay, so it sounds like that's gonna need a little more work next time.
Opposite inspection. Before we leave though, are you guys comfortable with the language regarding committees?
I did.
Did that.
Good.
And I did get some clarification from Libby. The wellness policy does not include a board-appointed wellness committee. There's some administrative role there, but the board does not have a wellness committee as well.
I have a question.
Yes.
Contract negotiation committee, is that a standing committee or is that just called into place during contract renegotiations?
I believe it's a standing committee.
Okay, because I don't think it's listed here.
I'm not sure we've ever decided one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cycle that keeps going, so it seems to make sense to have it.
It's never been charged,
Okay.
to my, and since I've been on the board, there was never a charge to it.
Well, ad hoc is fine, it's just I
Yeah.
didn't know. Okay. And I think the budget committee is referred to as the finance committee in a couple of different places. It could be budget and finance or something in the language.
It's called budget and finance.
Mhm.
That's-
Well, didn't we just
That was-
finalize the policy that
We
called?
did, and I think we called it the finance
Called it what?
committee there.
In the policy we just agreed on, we called it the finance committee.
Finance committee.
Okay.
Mhm. So just make it the same, whatever.
We don't want to include negotiations in here?
I think that can be.
Have it as ad hoc, okay, I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
Uh,
You can have years where there are no negotiations.
That's right.
Could call it the Labor Relations Committee.
That's a different thing though.
It
It's
is.
a different thing.
That's management, labor relations, it really is.
Yeah. Okay, good. Folks comfortable moving on? Any other comments? Okay,
Thanks for
perfect.
the work on that.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
Okay.
Okay, last but not least, superintendent expectations.
Maybe an easy language change. 2.5, bullet number 5. Instead of provide any significant other information the board requires, including anticipated, et cetera, could we restate that into something like provide any information the board requires for any significant circumstance, including anticipated and actual media coverage, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know, I just found the provide any significant other information kind of clunky.
Could you put other just in front of significant? Provide
Yeah.
any other significant information?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
Would that
might
be-
do it.
That'd be fine,
Do it.
yeah. Oh, and we need to change 2.1 bullet 4, public, communities in the public about the district's vision,
That's right,
not district's mission.
Is that a mission vision thing?
yeah.
Yeah.
Question.
Yes.
I think it was 2 meetings ago, we approved the job description for the superintendent. Do you see these as 2 separate freestanding documents, or should we look to align the 2? Because the job description has a lot of overlap with this, but it does not align entirely. Is that something that we need to have the committee look at again? You know, I'm
Yeah.
fine with that. I
Yeah.
think they should certainly not contradict each other.
Yeah,
So I can.
Which
I'll
committee
just-
should try to align, the evaluation committee or the
The
policy?
superintendent evaluation committee is the one that created the job description, so it would be the one that makes sure that it aligns at least, and I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah.
I need to know what to do.
I think it should definitely align, I don't think it has to be verbatim.
Okay,
Um,
but certainly.
And, yeah, I think a job description could be more descriptive or more expansive in some ways.
Okay,
But
that's what we'll do.
I think it certainly has to align with the spirit and certainly not contradict.
Sure.
So should we put this up for adoption? Would that work ahead or no? Make sure that happens first.
Let's make sure it happens first. I don't see anything in here that does not meet the intent to, but I want us to have a meeting and make sure it meets the spirit of the job description too, and the spirit of this.
Okay, anything more on superintendent expectations? Great, I think we've got two that should be ready for adoption.
Got it, yep.
One where we define some things out, and then also this where we just include the lines with superintendent job description. I think that's it, I think,
Need a motion for executive session?
in motion for executive session.
And there's actually two things in the executive session?
There's two things in the executive session,
Need to invite Grant into it? Do we need to formally or no?
I don't think so, I think he can go in as, we've never done that in the past.
No, we don't, that doesn't have to be part of the motion.
So we have purposes of, contract negotiations, correct? And,
Well, that's not on,
Well, an appointment of the,
it's an appointment of a public
Recommendation.
official, and this bullet is contract negotiation?
It's document, so, public.
yeah. Which deals with a previous contract negotiation.
Because it's different bullets. It's different, provisions for executive session. One is to discuss or consider records or documents that are not public documents. It's a different reason.
Okay.
And I don't know why we're going to executive session. I don't know which one you want.
That's accurate.
It's accurate, okay. It's documents exempt, and then we also need, I'm not quite sure what the one is.
Okay, I can try. So I move that the board enter executive session for two purposes: to discuss documents, discuss and consider documents that are not public documents under the Access to Public Records Act, and to consider the appointment of a public officer.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So we need an actual motion to go into executive session, correct?
No, that wasn't the
That
motion.
was it.
It wasn't one of
Oh, that's
those
right,
that
we don't
defined
need,
it.
we don't need to